So we were talking about your place here, and I was curious if you could talk about some of the other wildlife that's around or that you've hunted, because it seems like you do a lot of hunting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Generally, I'll do white-tailed deer in the fall, going into winter, and that's my main source of meat.
Yeah, that guys say that burger was delicious. Yeah.
And then I'll usually do spring bear because it's you have less fat to deal with. It means there's that the
Right, they're lean then because they've worn through their reserves.
Yeah, I usually wait until later in the spring bear season, late May, early June, right before the cutoff, because then they've managed to put a little bit of fat back on.
Okay.
So they get the marbling back in their meat.
Yeah.
But they're not a walking forest pig, as we call them around here. But that's usually my hunting year is bear in the spring, white-tailed deer in the fall. And since the elk are starting to move back into this area, I'll probably maybe pick up an elk tag in the next few years. But then I won't have to hunt for like 2 or 3 years after getting an elk unless I share it with somebody.
Okay. Yeah.
So
yeah, they're big.
Yeah.
Really big. Yeah. Not quite moose big, but big.
Yeah, I mean they're pretty. In some respects they're pretty close to a moose as far as the amount of meat you get. Because a moose is basically just a really ugly giraffe. So it's mostly
or a really cute one.
Yeah, depending. Yeah. But the long legs.
Yes. Yeah, they have very long legs.
So the
and they're surprisingly agile.
Yes.
Yes.
I've seen one jump a 6-foot fence like it wasn't there. So.
Yeah, I've seen them like walk between cars and they will not brush the cars at all. They just go right through.
Yeah. But so that's basically what I hunt.
I was wondering about bear specifically. My one of my uncles is a hunter, and he so I did eat bear when I was a kid, and I actually didn't like it. It was the only wild meat that I didn't like, and I'm not sure why that is. But it was really, really strong tasting and really fatty, and there was something about it I just didn't like.
Yeah, that was probably a fall or winter bear, and that's another reason why I hunt in spring.
Okay.
Because the fall bear tends to have. It's like no matter how much fat you peel off of them, it's like the meat is just sitting in it.
It was like it was in the meat.
Yeah,
like,
and
like the marbling part.
And it coats your tongue. Yeah. I don't like the taste of fall bear.
I can see how it would be really good survival food, though. I mean,
yeah. In a pinch, eat it up and use the bear fat for various reasons.
Yeah. And people who did live out here did that. They had a lot of uses for bear fat.
Yeah, everything from using it to protect their skin from windburn and sunburn to rendering it down and making tallow candles out of it.
Right.
So.
Yeah. I even heard that with the older guns, people would use the grease in their guns.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was really good at keeping rust out of your guns, especially in a moist environment like this.
In Minnesota, I actually found a sign. It was a street sign. It said Bear Grease Road. So, and you were mentioning while we were outside at some point, and you were so happy about this because we abut some state land here. And you were saying that there's some older cedars up here because they are often not logged. And, they actually used to be considered junk trees.
Yeah.
So you actually do have bigger, older cedar trees up here in the mountains and in other places. And what did you find in your wanderings?
I found a lightning struck cedar that's maybe a 5-minute scramble from my back door.
Yeah. It does suddenly go downhill, though.
Yeah, and
it's a pretty good.
And it's not
steep.
the downhill; it's all the jack straw from all the broken treetops and dead trees that are in there. So you're scrambling over and under and through.
Yes, I get it.
But it's a cedar. It's probably 24 inches in diameter. Mm-hmm. At least what's left of it. It could have been bigger when it still had bark and all that. Mm-hmm. But it was lightning struck. Mm-hmm. So the center of it is fairly hollow. Mm-hmm. Well, there's a beehive in there.
Yeah.
And there is honeycomb.
Did the bee colony move in afterwards, or do you think it was in there before that?
It moved in afterwards because you can see the comb is inside the char from the lightning strike.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So it's probably within the last 5 or 10 years.
Okay.
And the last time I was down there, I mean, a bear might have gotten to it this spring, but last time I was down there, the honeycomb went up to about 15 feet up the tree.
Wow. Really?
And started roughly at chest height to me.
Wow.
So.
Wow, that is huge.
Yeah.
Wow.
So
do you have any plans for that? I know you keep mentioning that there's a rather big black bear, which you've named around here, mm-hmm. and then also a grizzly mm-hmm. that, because this is state land, right
mm-hmm.
abutting you. So this is, where they're able to live. Mm-hmm. Right. Do you feel like you're slightly in competition for that honeycomb or?
Probably.
Yeah.
That's why I said, it's possible that the bears got into it this spring because it seems like the comb is moving down the tree as opposed to going up.
Okay.
But, so I figured the bears have had their eye on that honey and it's well within their reach, at least the lower half of the hive.
Sure.
I don't think that a larger bear could climb that tree.
Yeah. One of those black bears, sure.
Well, even the larger black bears, I don't think they would climb the tree
sure.
Because it's unstable.
Okay.
I mean, a good hard wind in just the right direction would probably push it over.
Okay.
Because it's one of the older trees.
Mm-hmm. So it's just kind of brittle and
yeah.
Okay.
So
if you could, what would you do? Yeah.
I'd probably take a dozen or so buckets out with me and mm-hmm. harvest some of the honeycomb and extract the honey.
Yeah.
Lightly filter it, just so there's no chunks in it.
How would you filter it, by the way? Do you like through a centrifuge or something?
I would probably do it the old-fashioned way. You just take a clean bucket and you stretch a double or triple layer of cheesecloth over it.
Basically, so just gravity.
Yeah, and just let gravity do its thing and, gradually break up the comb so more of it comes
mm-hmm.
out.
Yeah, I've seen kind of cooperative efforts where a community will buy a kind of a centrifuge mm-hmm. and then they will use that to spin out mm-hmm. the honey. Yeah. But that's kind of a big operation. That requires several people to buy that.
Yeah. But there are a couple of neighbors who do keep bees,
mm-hmm.
who do have the equipment to extract honey.
Yeah.
So I imagine that, as long as I promise to clean up their equipment, because wild honey and domestic honey, they can't mix them if they're going to sell it.
Oh, okay.
So I'd have to sterilize their equipment for them.
Oh, interesting.
But
is that because of disease transmission or something, or the mites, or?
It's all of the above.
Okay.
But it's also a USDA thing.
Okay. All right. Okay.
Yeah. So wild honey and domestic honey have to be kept separate.
Interesting. I did not know that.
Yeah.
Wow.
But so my plans would be, because I need at least 5 pounds of honey mm-hmm. At a time to do it, is to brew up mead. So
that Viking part is showing his face again. Show us your mug, by the way.
Traditional ox horn.
Yeah, so it's an actual horn here.
So
I drank out of a little horn last night too. It was a smaller one. That's great. Skull. Awesome. Yeah. So. Let's see, hunting and honey. Would you do anything with the wax, the beeswax?
Yeah, I'd probably use it for various things, from crafting to making emergency candles, because personally I'd rather smell beeswax candles burning in the house than the paraffin emergency ones, which kind of get a kind of a rancid smell. After a while.
I don't like those either. There's it kind of burns my nose, like it feels like acrid,
or you get a taste in the back of your throat.
I totally get you. The beeswax ones, although they burn a lot hotter, so you got to watch out for your hands if you handle it. They're so sweet smelling. I mean, it's like a comforting kind of smell. Yeah. I wonder if it's like a deep, like sort of ancestral memory or something.
It could be.
It's kind of woo woo, but there you go. I mean, we're all made of this material.
Yeah. Or it's probably some sort of unconscious memory that we have. It's like, for people who never necessarily remember like grandparent or great grandparent, but they get that absolute sense of calm if they smell like jasmine or lavender or
lilac or something.
Something like that. It's comfort, like they're being held and loved and stuff.
My grandma had honeysuckle in her backyard, and then also she always had like a lilac scented perfume or soap or something. So I smell those and I'm like, yeah, grandma.
So it's like an unconscious memory.
Sure,
and beeswax, like real beeswax candles burning like that, kind of bring that out in people.
Yeah, I agree. So speaking of that, of people, we haven't talked about you very, very much. I was curious. I have lots of curiosity about you because we transitioned at pretty much the same time.
Pretty much.
Yeah, pretty much. We took testosterone, I guess, in the same year, 2000, and you're living a very different lifestyle, though. I do live in a red area, so I do have some of that, and I have lived in a cabin. But you are living very remotely, which is a little bit different. I was living just outside of Fairbanks, which is a city. It's a small city, but so I'm curious about your life, and I want to hear about it. So when did you? How did you identify before you were a trans man, or decided to transition?
When I was coming of age and whatnot, because of where I grew up.
In Colorado.
In Colorado. I mean, it's a small farming town. You knew what gay was, you knew what lesbian was, you knew what it meant, but the whatever form of the T word you wanted to use, whether it was transsexual, transgendered.
Or cross-dresser.
Or
transvestite. Or
it wasn't used.
Or she-male. There's all kinds of words that they used back then that they don't use anymore. Or people who are respectful don't use anymore.
Yeah, so that wasn't something that I even had a clue about,
Or maybe in the negative too.
Right.
Because sometimes religious people will talk very negatively.
Yeah.
If there's some sort of cultural moment, like somebody is mentioned who is gay on TV, or somebody who's trans.
Yes. Yeah. So that was a reference that I didn't have because of where I grew up.
Yeah.
And the valley I grew up in, even today, is like very, very red, like blood red.
And what do you mean by that?
As in very conservative.
Okay. But sounds like kind of beyond conservative.
Yeah, beyond conservative. The Ku Klux Klan is known to operate there.
Yes.
Even now.
Yeah.
And let's just say if you're any shade darker than mayonnaise, you're a target.
Okay.
There.
Yeah. Right. And there's lots of people of color there. I'm guessing too a lot of immigrants who come through there because of agriculture.
Yeah. I mean, they're kind of people essentially put on blinders.
Yeah. Even though they depend on them.
Right. Well, they put on blinders. They don't see them.
Okay. But they depend on them.
Yes.
They depend on their labor.
Yeah.
So
it's
a strange situation.
Yeah. Without the migrant workers, that valley would die.
Right.
So they tend
but
to
then they hate them. It's so weird.
Yeah, it's basically they're fine with them as long as they come, they do their job, they leave. If they come and they never leave, then suddenly there's a problem with them.
Wow. So if they want to, live the American dream, well, screw you. Okay. Yeah. Have some babies and,
Right.
Live somewhere, have a nice house. No, fuck you,
Yeah. So it was a little odd,
Yeah.
being from one of the few farm families
Yeah.
that was actually, the term now would be very liberal.
Okay.
But
So you were woke or whatever. That term is so funny. I think.
Yeah.
Anyway, or how it's used by like white people or whatever.
Yeah.
Because it's actually comes out of Black liberation. It's actually a really cool term.
Yeah. But yeah, so it was a little odd being, the only farm family that was, liberal, voted Democrat,
Right.
because that was before there was all the, things like the Green Party or
Sure,
whatever.
yes, yeah.
Basically, it was Republican, Democrat.
Right.
And my parents were like Democrats, I mean, they bled blue.
Wow. Yeah.
So,
if you're in a very red place, it's often you have to be even more strongly blue or liberal, or if you're leftist leaning, then you're very leftist leaning because you're pushing back against the Republicans or the right wing that's in an area. And so it's almost like you're more blue than the people like in Seattle or something like that.
Yeah, because you have to make up for
exactly.
the extremist on the other end.
Exactly. So, all the fingers get pointed at you. Oh, you blue person or whatever.
But to get back to it, I mean, I didn't have the language to describe how I felt.
Right.
I knew from a very young age.
And this is pre-internet and all that.
Basically, if you needed a book on, needed to learn anything that had to do with, trans anything, whatever term you want to use, you had to go to the library and get them to borrow a book from the library in Denver, which could take 2 to 3 weeks whenever the, bookmobile made it that far.
Sure.
And then, read a book that was maybe 40 pages.
Yeah. And also, I mean, I also tried to look for stuff like that, right? I went to libraries and, I was in relatively big cities, and, Houston, Texas, Seattle, Portland. And oftentimes all I could find were references in abnormal psychology books.
Yeah, like the DSM.
Yeah, or, textbooks or something like that, case studies. And it was always pathologized, like, oh, it's some sort of fetish or, something's wrong with these people.
It's a mental illness.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And so there wasn't, I never saw anything positive. And then on the other end, too, there were a whole bunch of like feminist books, but, they weren't really feminist the way that we think about them now, the way that feminism has thankfully evolved. But it was against trans women, calling them a menace, that sort of thing. Yeah. Really hard times.
Yeah, it was. Yeah. So I didn't have the language.
Yeah.
And, so I was very much a, what would probably be classified by outsiders as like the ultimate stone butch.
Okay. Yeah. And what is a stone butch?
Basically, you're as masculine as possible. You only date women.
Okay.
Nobody ever touches you.
Okay.
You're the boss.
So if you're touched, that would make you what?
It would basically kind of break your identity.
Okay.
Because suddenly you are no longer the one in power.
Okay. All right.
But that was kind of the attitude. And it was kind of the attitude you needed to have.
Why do you say that? Why'd you need it?
Basically, if you had the untouchable attitude and air and stuff, people didn't try to mess around with you.
Okay.
They would back off.
Okay. It sounds lonely, though. It sounds isolating.
It was until I went to college. But at least as far as being back home, it basically kind of put out, kind of within other people's radar that they could pick up on is if you come at me, I will fight.
Okay.
I will defend myself.
Okay. Were there only like a couple choices? Like either like people were messing with you, as you're saying. I'm going to assume that they were trying to insist that you be very feminine or female identifying. Whereas if you isolate yourself a little bit, then that's not going to happen. Is that maybe the case? Somewhat,
yeah. And also, just the more, sure of myself, more masculine air that came with the bull dyke thing is also kept people who wanted to do me harm away, because they've got it through their thick skulls that, you come at me, I will come right back.
Yeah. Right. And a lot of those bull daggers did. A lot of those dykes did. Like they were often armed. They took on almost a biker culture kind of air about them. Like they often had motorcycles. They they would often dress in leather. Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I mean I had, the typical biker jacket. And there was
I could never afford one.
And I had, the old style choke chains. The slip. They also the slip collar. Choke chain,
like in your lapel. Or
on the lapel.
Yeah.
And that lapel was I had modified the snap so it was a quick release.
Okay.
So all I had to do was grab that chain and I could have it wrapped around my fist in under a second.
Yeah. There was a lot of violence.
Yeah.
There was also a lot of there was a violence from the outside. Definitely. I mean, definitely. There was also violence within the community as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I got a lot of shit from the we'll just call it the more centrist / lipstick lesbians, or the I don't know what they term them now, but the chapstick lesbians, the ones who wanted to be
the sporty ones.
Yeah, basically the more neutral ones. That they could be classified as a little on the butch side, but they still had their femme side.
Butchy.
Yeah.
Butchy was like, that's not a good term, or soft butch or something. Yeah. You never wanted to be soft. Yeah. Right.
Yeah, so I was on, this end of the spectrum, and then there's the ones on the way other end of the spectrum. Everybody expected you to be right down the middle.
Yeah. So we're talking about some of the negative aspects of it, like of, kind of a self-defense, right? Did you find any joy in that, like of having that kind of identity?
To some degree.
Yeah.
When I came of age and could go to the bars or the clubs, whatnot. It was kind of nice because I'd walk in and it's like everybody would notice.
Oh yes, I remember that.
I was like the center of attention.
I understand. I got that as well. I was also very butch, and it's like you knew your place, and you were a wanted commodity. I hate to use that kind of term, but lots of women wanted you. Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Even the ones who would give you crap at the women's marches and stuff, because you were upholding this,
right. You were male identified or too masculine or
you were at the club, you give them what, they get a drink in them and suddenly you're what they actually want.
And even like straight women would kind of troll those areas. They would come to the bars. Totally.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, totally. Oh yeah, see? Yeah, we get that. We get that laugh right there.
Yeah.
There's some stories in there.
Yeah. Better left unsaid.
Okay. This is not that kind of video.
No.
Hopefully there will be some kind of video like that, but this is just going on YouTube and the platforms.
YouTube would probably shut you down if I told you any of those.
Yeah.
So
when did you decide that wasn't enough, or that you'd, I don't know, had enough of that, or that you needed to change, or that sort of thing? Whatever language you would use around that.
When I was my sophomore year of college, I guess.
Which you smiled about, by the way, going to college. Were you a hot commodity there as well?
To some degree, yeah. I tried to keep my nose in the books.
Okay.
But I also played rugby.
Okay.
Where I met my girlfriend.
Okay. Classic.
Yeah.
Classic.
Yeah. And she was from the East Coast.
Okay.
So she had more exposure to terminology and communities and whatnot.
And this was still in Colorado?
This was in Colorado,
Okay.
yeah. A college, which is now a university up in the mountains.
Okay. Yeah.
And she was going home for Christmas break, and she hands me a small package that was wrapped, with a bow on it. She's just like, "Here's your Christmas present. I expect you to finish this by the time I get home."
Okay. What was it?
It was a signed copy of Stone Butch Blues.
Oh, yes. Leslie Feinberg.
Yes.
Good book.
Yes.
Good book.
So, and that finally gave me a start in the right direction as far as it's like, aha.
So it described your experience somewhat.
Yeah.
You identified
it
with
was
the
closer than anything else I had seen.
Yeah. Right.
And it finally gave me the language to go along with it.
Yeah. Could you do me a favor and write more towards this? Sure. Yeah. Yeah, there you go.
So yeah, it finally gave me the language.
Yeah.
That I was lacking because of where I grew up.
Yeah.
And
I will tell you that book also helped me. Yeah, totally.
And I mean, it also, even though it's a work, technically a work of fiction, and I had the chance to talk to Leslie years ago. I did find out that while it might be a work of fiction, it's also more true than people think it is.
Oh yes. Oh yeah. I imagined that when I was reading it.
Yes.
It was there was
a little too much detail.
Yeah, there was a significant amount of truth in that book. Definitely.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, but you have to. I don't know why they felt the. I say they because I'm not sure of how
Leslie's pronouns. Were they them or here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I know that they kind of went back and forth a little bit. Yeah. Which was totally their right. Which was totally their right to do that.
But yeah, so that opened the door.
Yes.
And from there, it's like the rest is history.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, it was a few years after that before I really got the ball rolling, because I wanted to try and do the research. So I'm, make sure that yes, that was indeed.
Yeah. Well, you do have to do a lot of research too, because there wasn't a lot of information out there.
Yeah, and it's not like there was the gender ID clinic on every other corner.
No. Even in the big cities, it was really difficult to find doctors that would help you. Yeah. You had to really resource that information from other trans people who had already been through it.
Yeah. Or, chat with somebody at your local LGBT center or PFLAG.
Which those were pretty new at the time as well.
Yeah. I mean,
there weren't a lot of those either.
Even student organizations, because I was the president of the campus. Well, at that time, it was the, let's see, what was it? It was the Gay and Lesbian Allies Alliance or something.
Sure. Just kind of a generic name.
Basically, yeah.
Yeah.
But it was kind of a precursor to, things like the, at Evergreen. I don't know if it's still under this name, but when I was in Olympia, it was called the Queer Alliance. So that way it was an umbrella term.
Sure.
Because the terminology was changing every other week.
Yeah. Which it should.
Yeah.
Which it should. I mean, people sometimes complain about that. Oh, look, you're using a different term or whatever. But people get to do that. English is a living language. Sometimes the terms that we use don't describe their experience. Like, for instance, non-binary people. At the time that we were transitioning, some people were calling themselves genderqueer. But that didn't fit everybody else as well, because some people didn't identify with being queer at all.
Right.
But their gender was kind of more in between.
Or gender fluid.
Yeah.
Or,
Right.
Because they might be more feminine today. They might be more masculine tomorrow.
Exactly. In fact, recently I've been calling myself rather gender flexible, because, way back then there wasn't a lot of flexibility.
Right. Yeah, it was A or B.
Right.
Yeah.
And I feel like in a way it's something that I went through, but I felt like it also harmed me because I in myself felt pressure. And so I made myself kind of rigid inside, with my emotions, with how I would do things. Like before I wouldn't have been doing this with my hands, right? I would be conscious of that and be like, straighten up, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I wouldn't let my voice modulate as much as I do now. I wouldn't be as smiley, frankly, Do you feel like you impose some of that on yourself, or was it more natural for you? Because you're pretty butch. You're still pretty butch.
For me, it's kind of natural.
Yeah.
And some of that is probably upbringing.
Right.
But, and then others of it is just, that's kind of the attitude I've had since, I was knee high to a grasshopper.
Sure.
So,
well, the lovely thing about that is there's many ways to be a man, right? Thankfully.
Yeah.
So, speaking of organizations, like you were involved in some organizations when you were first starting out. You also mentioned a group that you were involved with when you were dyke or lesbian. What was that?
That was the Lesbian Avengers in Denver.
And I heard about that. That was kind of a national group.
Yeah, they were.
They were cellular, but it was the idea was national.
Yeah, it's kind of like PFLAG is national, but it's separated into
local
cities.
too.
Yeah. But
what did they do?
Caused all sorts of trouble.
Okay, tell me about that.
Shut down downtown by doing an arm-in-arm march, usually shirtless.
Why would they do these protests?
They would do them at times, like if there was some questionable legislation or laws being passed that were either anti-trans, anti-woman.
Yes, right. And at that time, we were coming out of a period in the late 90s when there was a lot of legislation that was anti-gay.
And some of that, and some of that too. Yeah. And also a couple of times we did a protest that marched down Colfax and then up the Capitol steps, because that was before they had security outside the building all the time. To protest something to do. I think there was some serial rapist or whatever that they were talking about getting pardoned by the governor.
Oh God, really?
Yeah, I think that's what the situation was, but my memory's not what it used to be.
Sure.
But it was something to do with that.
Yeah, right.
So that's some of the other stuff that we did.
Right. Did you ever do like art projects? Like I was involved in some groups that would address social issues in their art practice, and then bring that out to the public, like doing some wheat pasting of woodcuts and that sort of thing, of very deep issues like around sexual assault or abuse and that sort of thing.
Not at that time.
Okay.
Once I got to Olympia, I was asked to help out with a.
How did you end up in Olympia, by the way? Because that's a big jump.
My college girlfriend ended up at Evergreen State College.
Okay, yeah.
So I ended up in Olympia, and
how would you describe Olympia versus where you grew up in Colorado?
Okay, where I grew up in Colorado was the 9th level of hell.
Yeah. And very dry.
Very dry, very hot, very rural.
Yeah.
Very clanny. And then going to Olympia, it was like paradise. There's gay friendly bars everywhere.
Yeah.
There was actually ordinances in the city that prevented discrimination in housing and employment. Whole 9 yards. And it was just clean.
Yeah, very clean. Yeah.
Except when the sound was really low on the extreme low tide. Sure. Then it wasn't so clean smelling because of the mud flats.
Right, mud flats. Yeah, because there's anoxic conditions and you get a kind of a stink. But I will say that Olympia is a really beautiful city, especially the environs there, because it's like heavily wooded, and then you're right on the sound, you're right on the water there. It's so beautiful. Goodness gracious.
Yeah, and then Capitol Lake.
Yeah.
It's just
and
beautiful.
then there's a lot of exploring you can do in the forest. A lot of people actually live in the forest too. Some of them are squatting, which is kind of a culture there. And then blackberries, lots of blackberries.
Blackberries and red huckleberries and some raspberries. They're a little less common.
I've never seen raspberries.
Yeah, they're a little less common. They're more if you're like up in Lacey, more towards Tacoma where it's a little drier. You'll find the raspberries.
Sure.
But like if you're like over near Evergreen State College,
it's very wet
and
over
Mud
there.
Bay. Oh yeah,
Yeah,
120.
so
Up to 120 inches of rain a year.
Yeah, and if you go closer to the Olympic Peninsula, of course, you get temperate rainforests.
Yeah, because that's where the Hoh rainforest is.
Yeah, right.
Done a lot of exploring in there.
Oh yeah, I once took a bicycle trip all the way around the Olympic Peninsula.
Oh, on the Coast Highway.
Yeah, it was great. I went through a town. What was it? Sappho and then Beaver. I thought that was hilarious. Anyway.
Yeah, and then you should have flown to Climax in Colorado.
Okay.
So.
And Bear Grease.
Yep.
Anyway.
Yep. Just done the tour.
Hit all the spots.
Yeah.
So it sounds like you had a really good time in Olympia.
Yeah.
Like it was really different from where you grew up.
It was totally freeing, because I could just be me and everybody's like, okay.
Yeah.
And a friend of mine who also lived there and was also trans-identified, but assigned male at birth. But
yeah, at the time, I think people were using language like male identified. Like that was kind of a thing.
Yeah.
Kind of.
But, using today's term, but assigned male at birth or AMAB. Yeah. But identified gender fluid, but tended more towards the female than than middle of the road.
People might say demi these days.
Yeah. I don't keep up with all the terminology.
It's hard to keep up.
I would drive myself crazy and I'd never get anything else done.
Well, it's hard to keep up. I rely on younger people to help me with that, and they're often really giving. They're having all these conversations like on Discord and stuff that we are just not privy to.
Yeah,
I'm okay with that too, but I appreciate it when they keep me up to date. I do.
Yeah, but they would. Be super, super feminine one day, the glitter and the sequins and the hair up and,
and that's nothing new too.
No, basically looked like a drag queen, drag queens of Walmart.
Yeah.
Cause, would still have, the kick-ass steel-toed Doc Martens and whatnot. It's like from the waist down was like punk, from the waist up was drag queen.
Okay,
so
there's a lot going on there.
Yeah,
speaking of drag queens at Walmart, I actually did see one in Oklahoma City in the Paseo district, which is kind of like the art district, and there's some gay bars in there. Yeah,
that's kind of the safe area.
Yeah, but not too safe though. But it is relatively. And there was a black drag queen, or I'm thinking that she was a drag queen rather than trans or transgender, because she was really done up.
Well done.
Like really done up. But I don't know this person's identity, but I was so happy to see them there.
Yeah.
I mean, I am just, kind of a stealth trans man, but out in the world, when I see openly queer or trans people, I'm like, yeah.
Yeah, it's like.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, wow, it's so great. Anyway.
Yeah.
Especially in Oklahoma City, you'd think it'd be, you wouldn't see that, but yeah.
And, well, it's like around here, it's a very conservative area. The main town nearby actually is fairly liberal.
Okay.
But the county, as well as the surrounding counties, are like blood red.
Oh yeah. Well, famously so, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Like neo-Nazis and shit.
Yeah, and things like Ruby Ridge and
right.
which was relatively close.
Yeah.
But down in town, I was just randomly downtown at the hardware store, and like, I knew what to look for, so I clocked him as trans.
Oh, right.
But to everybody else in the world, completely stealth.
Yeah.
And we just like locked eyes, and he's just like, yeah, kind of like the hey brother.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
You know what I don't like though is when some trans people will look at me and then not acknowledge. It's like, okay, well that's okay. I get that you're stealth, but it's a weird thing to hide from another trans person.
Yeah.
I mean that's some loneliness there, I think.
Or even with without the kind of like the hey,
yeah, just a little,
just real subtle
little acknowledgement. It's okay,
Yeah. But I imagine if we had been like on the street with 100 people around us, that he may not have even acknowledged me.
Yeah, sure.
But we were down the same aisle at the hardware store.
Yeah. But sometimes also when you're in a crowd, no one's going to notice if you say something to somebody.
Right. Yeah.
That's one of the wonderful things about the anonymity of living in cities.
True.
Yeah. Did you have that when you lived like in the Puget Sound area, like a little bit more freedom because you were away from your family and the place where you grew up?
I mean, I had that freedom because I didn't have to worry about, running into people I went to high school with, or, the known problem children, we'll just call them that, back home, that I knew were bigots and assholes.
Sure,
and, whatnot. But there was still the issue of I was well known for who and what I was. Because
even in Olympia,
because I was active, with the Queer Alliance at Evergreen.
Okay, so you were politically active.
And very visible. I was also on the planning commission for Olympia Pride.
Oh, wow.
So my face was out there.
Yeah.
People knew who I was. Yeah. They knew my name.
Right. And it's the capital too.
Yes.
So that's where like bills and legislators are. Yeah, totally.
So, and I was assaulted in downtown Olympia, walking home from an event that was at one of the, that was, kind of leading up to Pride.
Okay.
It was kind of a fundraiser for, I don't recall what, but it was kind of in that. And I almost didn't make it home that night.
Okay.
So, and I actually lived downtown.
Okay.
At that point.
Do you think somebody had targeted you because they knew about you or something? Okay.
Yes. I mean, based on what they said.
Right.
And the trash talking they were doing.
What a nightmare. I mean, that's why a lot of people are completely stealth.
Yeah. I mean, thankfully, my parents thought ahead when I was young, and they did teach me, they did make sure that I had martial arts and self-defense, and I took self-defense throughout my life.
Yeah.
So I learned to, use actual weapons.
Yeah.
And I also learned to make do with whatever was there.
Right.
And the reason I walked away is because I got my hands on the loose lead drainage pipe before they did.
There you go.
So.
There you go. Yeah.
So, yeah, I walked out of that alley. They did not.
Yeah. There you go. Yeah.
I mean, I wasn't unscathed.
Yeah. Well, he deserved what he got. There you go.
All three of them.
Okay. 3 of them. Cowards. Motherfucking cowards. Wow. All right.
So.
Yeah. How did you do after that?
It was fine. I mean, I took a couple days off to just chill and let the black eye.
Yeah. Did you have pretty good community around you that you could rely on?
Oh yeah. Basically, once a couple of my friends found out, they got the word out, and suddenly I was very subtly escorted anytime I left my apartment building.
Okay. Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
They didn't make it obvious, but it's just like, it's a coincidence once when you see the same big scary biker bear, across the street from where you live, and just basically keeps an eye on you and walks the same direction you do.
Yeah.
But when it happens 3, 4, 5, 6 times in a row.
Well, good on you, biker bear.
So.
I want to meet you, biker bear.
But I mean, this guy was scary. I mean,
great.
And he walked around with brass knuckles on his fist all the time.
Awesome.
So
that's an ally right there. Yep. Yep.
But,
I actually had a vigilante in Houston, Texas, admit to me that he watched over me sometimes when I was a teenager, because I was kind of on the strip in Lower Westheimer of Houston, there was a lot going on there, let's just say. And I was just kind of an innocent babe out there, kind of a tourist. And I had people who did watch out for me. So good on you. Good on you, vigilante guy.
Yeah. So, I mean, so there was always someone, kind of at least watching over my shoulder.
Good. Well, I mean, and you deserve that protection too, because you were really out there protecting other people's rights.
Yeah.
There you go.
So
there you go. Yeah.
Yeah. So
you were a very public person at some point.
Yeah, and that was early in my transition.
Okay.
So this was like the first needle was barely in my leg before I was like trans rights.
Well, yeah. I mean, and it was your identity before that too. It's not like suddenly you're a trans person. This is a long process.
Yeah, I mean, but that was like the culmination. That was like I turned the corner.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and two, because you grew up in such a restrictive place, so conservative that it sounds like neo-Nazi and KKK clan oriented, how bad it can get, right? So good on you for pushing back on that, to really putting yourself out there. That's what I try to tell people. They have this view of activists like they're just causing trouble, or they just want attention for themselves. I don't know a lot of activists that want attention for themselves. They want attention for the issues.
Right.
Because they don't want to be out there doing it. They just have to be doing it.
Yeah, because they do if I don't do it, who else will?
That's right.
But I mean, it was to the point where whenever I'd go home, to visit my parents, or even like, because both my parents passed early on in my transition. But
did they know about you?
Yes, they did.
Okay.
And my dad, when I came out to him, actually just a few months before he passed, he punched me in the arm, and he's just like, "It's about damn time."
All right. Yay, Dad. Yay, Dad.
He's like, "Why do you think I taught you all those things? How to change your oil, how to rebuild a transmission, all that fun stuff."
So you're Mr. Fix-It.
Right. So.
And you hunt for your neighbors.
Right. So then that's why my dad taught me like that.
Yeah.
Because he knew when I was young. He knew before I knew.
Yes. Yes. Awesome.
My mom, on the other hand, was a little bit, "Are you sure? Are you sure you're sure?" But she was a beautician.
Okay.
So, and my parents are much older than all my friends' parents.
Okay.
They
not even boomers, but
no,
older.
My siblings are boomers.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
As in like the first boomers.
Yeah.
So my parents were much older, but but anyway, my mom was a beautician. So she had experience and exposure because she worked with a lot of gay men. Weren't necessarily out, but they were there, and most of them were flamboyant. She called them, her favorite thing was, "Oh, that's as queer as a $3 bill."
Well, it's interesting because in some ways, cross-dressing, as we used to call it, or being gay or whatever, it was very much a part of the culture. Like you could watch game shows on daytime TV,
right,
and there would be openly gay men. I mean, you knew they were gay because they were really camping it up, and they were beloved.
Yeah.
They were beloved in they were kind of playing characters, and it was a little bit of a caricature, but actually. It was a representation of gay people out in the culture. Yeah. It really was.
Yeah, because you either had the, out and flamboyant or the very stealth and, unobvious ones.
Sure.
That was basically the full gamut right there.
Yeah. It's interesting that it's such a problem now, though. Oh, my goodness. Yeah,
it's like, these guys are like, Wesley Snipes, and these guys, and,
John Leguizamo. Is that
John Leguizamo.
Are you talking about that movie?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, it's just like
Patrick Swayze.
Yeah,
too.
Patrick Swayze. Oh, these guys are so butch. They're, you know, masculine, but I'm just like, and this, and, you know, bring up Tu Wong Fu.
Yeah.
It's like they made 3 of the best drag queens I've ever seen.
That's right. That's right. And I heard one drag queen talking about being a drag queen, that it wasn't about being a woman. It was actually about exploring what it was to be a man, you know? Yeah.
So, but yeah, it's, you know, and they're just like, oh, that doesn't count, you know, whenever you bring that up.
Okay. It doesn't count. It's very much a part of our culture. Anyway.
And all 3 of them still talk, you know, or at least, you know, until Patrick passed, they would still talk about that role.
Yeah, sure.
You know?
Sure.
So,
Sure.
but
So how was your early transition? We talked about this a little bit last night. I usually just like to meet people and then start the interview, but we had a little bit of downtime and we were talking, and then you were very kind and let me sleep in a very nice bed last night and take a shower, which, woo, if you've been on a road trip for a while, that's such a blessing. All right, the dogs are getting wild here.
no one's here.
Okay. Yeah, so we were, the dogs were just going wild for a second there, so we took a little break. But we were talking a little bit before our interview because you allowed me to stay here last night, which was so generous of you. I slept in a nice bed and took a shower. Ooh, so good for, you know, somebody on a road trip. And our transition was a lot different. So there was kind of this cusp where you got to go through the informed consent route, whereas I went through the older route where you had to basically go through a couple of years of therapy before anybody would kind of sign off on you to start. Yeah. And that took a lot of activism to get there. So I'm glad that you got through it. But wow, at the time when they first came out with informed consent, I was so bitter about that because I had to spend so much money and wait.
Yeah, and you went through all the hoops and
Yeah,
blah, blah, blah.
It was so horrible.
At that point, the informed consent was a lot different than it is now.
Okay, tell me about that.
Then, basically, if you had essentially done your kind of 1-year test run in your...
So there was still a test run.
Basically...
Real life test is what they called it.
Yeah, RLT. Basically, if you went to a therapist and they could see that, you know, and that, you know, they, you know, like heard around that, yes, you had basically been living this identity on your own for an extended period. It didn't necessarily have to be a year.
Sure.
It just depends upon the therapist.
And it also probably depended on like how passing you were.
Right.
Which is an issue too.
Yeah. But I mean, you know, so they would essentially fudge the paperwork, so to speak.
Okay.
And let you pass go and collect $200 and get your T-shot, whatnot.
So there was some activism among medical providers to help people to expedite the process.
Yeah, I mean, and the therapist that my girlfriend at the time was seeing was actually a member of the LGBT community. She and her partner both.
Mine was too, actually. I had a couple of them, and both of them were lesbians.
But they they were active in the community. They practiced together, and they specialized in mostly gay, lesbian, and trans patients.
Okay, great.
But usually just talk therapy. They normally didn't do the gender transition stuff.
Sure.
But the one was actually experienced with the whole, all the DSM, what was it, 4 or 5 or whatever it was at that point.
Yeah.
And
the criteria. Diagnostics and all that.
And thought it was complete and utter horseshit.
Yeah, it was horseshit.
It's just like, if you're trans, you're trans.
Yeah.
Now if you've got some other issues, I can see, holding someone back for a few months so they can get all their ducks in a row.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
Before you throw one more stone in the pond.
Sure.
But,
but not mandated.
No.
Voluntary.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But, so she was like, I can see who you are. She's like, so go see this nurse practitioner. Tell her I sent you. Okay. And we'll get you your tea.
Yeah.
Because of the way the Harry Benjamin standards were and the DSM and whatnot, it wouldn't allow hormone therapy for anybody unless you were FTM
Yeah.
or MTF. You had to be 100% one way or the other.
Yeah.
You couldn't be on the in-between.
Yeah, that's why I felt like in some ways I felt imposed upon to be more masculine than I actually was.
Yeah.
It was almost like I had to butch myself up and play a role or something.
Yeah.
Even though I had felt like this for a long time. And, going on testosterone was definitely something I'd been thinking about for a long time. And I knew the risks and I knew the benefits. To satisfy some criteria out there that somebody else set on my life.
Yeah.
So I'm so glad that non-binary and gender fluid and genderqueer people did so much activism to open things up for people.
Yeah. Because I know of another assigned female at birth, trans person, who was basically forced to identify as FTM.
Oh, no.
In order to get hormones to basically neutralize themselves.
Oh, no.
Yet they, and once their therapist found out that they were a drag queen in their nightlife, they cut them off.
Right. And they used to do that with people who would afterwards be considered homosexual or queer or whatever. If you were like us, transitioning from female to male, and then you were going to live as a gay man, no, that was not.
Yeah.
They would not allow you to do that.
Basically, you're supposed to go from female to male and have a heterosexual relationship.
Yeah, and even prior to us, it was even more restrictive. People had to get divorced if they were married. They had to completely cut themselves off from their families, and they had to move to another town. Yeah, it was really hard. That's like torture. It isolates people even more.
Yeah.
It's
like saying, in order to do this, we're going to force you to move to Jupiter.
Yeah, right. And it made people feel that way.
Yeah.
It made people feel that way, like they're alien, that they're not connected somehow. Yeah. I'm so glad we're not living in those bad days anymore.
Yeah, it's nice that the Harry Benjamin standards went the way of the dinosaurs.
Yeah.
So.
I really hate this rhetoric from some anti-trans people, which that is a thing out there.
Yes, it is.
There are some trans people out there who've already gone through the transition from a long time ago who are like, yeah, but things aren't like the way that they used to be. Yeah, that's true. Thank God. Thank God it isn't like the way it used to be.
These are kind of, the way I look at it is these are kind of like the trans version of, those old timers who, whenever it's just like, oh, I had a rough day, and they're just like, well, and back in my day,
right.
We walked to school up, 5 miles in the snow uphill both ways.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting too, because it's interesting that you bring up the old aspect, because they think that because they're old, they know everything. Fuck that. There's so much that you can learn from the young people right now that, I'm open to it. You should be too, because they're coming up with really cool stuff and they've done all kinds of activism. And you and I, when we were young, we did so much activism too that made things better.
Yeah.
It's so interesting to me that some people are like gatekeeping who is trans, and they're trans people themselves. That's so fucked.
And while I may not understand, all the various phases of transness,
I don't either.
I may not be able to recognize the various phases and whatnot, but I'm not going to gatekeep somebody. It's like, okay, you want to identify as, butch male, the butchest male on the planet today. Great. Have fun.
I feel like I don't need to know.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of somebody else's business, as long as somebody's not hurting me, do what you want,
Yeah.